All right, welcome to the show. Others receiving votes. I'm Pat Forty, joined by Gene Wojciechowski and Brian Fisher as usual. And gentlemen, Duck Watch is on in the Windy City, Chicago. They're ready and waiting to see if a giant inflatable duck should possibly appear in Lake Michigan, looming over the Oregon Northwestern football game Saturday. They play at noon, which is a lovely 9 a.m. kickoff for the Ducks. And if you remember last year, when Oregon showed up for its first Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis, all of a sudden a giant inflatable Oregon Duck was in the White River. And so there is a question whether this is part of a systemic duck incursion into the Midwest. Gino, you have Chicago roots, so the people there on guard, are they looking out for the giant duck?
Pat, we have a lot of ducks and geese in that part of the world. I can confirm, I'm actually stunned that the duck's going to be awake at 9 a.m. body clock time. I did check the National Weather Service for maritime conditions, 10 knots out of the south. 1 foot waves, so the duck's going to be just fine bobbing on Lake Michigan. And I also checked the spread, and I think it's 27.5. So I think the real ducks are going to be okay too.
Yeah. I think if the duck is there, it's not going to get to see a great game, I don't think. But can't wait to see. Dan Lanning has been asked. David Braun has been asked. The coaches involved if they're ready for the duck to show up. So we are on Duck Watch in Evanston. And we're on termination watch in Gainesville. Let's get to the main topic here to start the show. Billy Napier going back into survival mode at Florida, where he has spent basically his entire tenure there. This is year 4 for him. And with great expectation and optimism, they laid a gigantic spit-soaked egg against South Florida, lost at home in the kind of way that SEC teams sometimes seem to lose, with just a forehead-slapping idiot maneuver, one of the players spitting on an opponent and helping enable the winning drive. So now they're going to LSU, which is ranked 3rd in the country, and that has been a wild rivalry, and we are ready to see if there's another interesting installment in it. Last year, Napier and Florida upset the Tigers to really jumpstart an end-of-the-season run that helped him keep his job. Can he do it again? Guys, if you are Scott Strickland, the athletic director at Florida, what are you thinking, and what do you think you're going to do with Billy Napier? Gene?
Well, Strickland just got a contract extension, so you have to think the decision is mostly in his hands. But he's in an incredibly tough spot. It's a $22 million buyout, according to USA Today. And even at Florida, that's no small chunk of change. It's only week 3, and we're talking about getting rid of this guy. But if you look at that schedule, these next 5 games are so hard. I honestly don't know what he does. If you beat LSU at LSU, the narrative changes instantly. The vibe changes instantly. But if you lose, now you've lost 2 games in a row. You're headed to Miami. The fan base will be in total revolt. They were already chanting "Fire Billy" in the concourses of the Swamp after the USF loss. I think all of a sudden, guys, that September 27th bye week comes into play as far as Strickland having to make a decision. And I never thought you'd say that, but there comes a point where you lose everybody and everything, and Strickland just might be forced to make a decision if they lose at LSU.
Yeah, I do think the fact that Scott has this new contract extension, the fact that, hey, look, there's an interim president, another interim president actually around that is not necessarily tied to any sort of decision regarding the football program. All this kind of makes Scott empowered to do something, with the football program. And as Jeremy Foley, his predecessor, would say, what must be done eventually should be done immediately. Now, I don't think that is quite the case with Florida, mostly because of that buyout that you mentioned there, Gene, because not only is it a large amount in total, but half of it is due within 30 days. So like
Mhm.
that is an important fact of the matter. It's tough to cut some $10 million checks nowadays. And I think that's going to be somewhat of a factor in terms of the timing here, because there's no doubt in my mind that he's not only lost the fan base, but like there's a real possibility that he ends up losing the team itself, given all the outside noise. And he did a great job in terms of rallying the guys down the stretch last year when this was the case, but it's hard to do that twice. It's hard to do that 2 years in a row. Say, all right, forget all this talk about my job. Let's just focus on football. Like that is a tough task for any head coach to do, especially in this day and age, in the NIL era. I think Billy has done a terrible job in terms of not only on the field coaching, but there was a lot of changes that he could have made within that program. He could have hired a play caller. He didn't. He was a little stubborn on a lot of things. And I think that's kind of come home to roost with performances like what we saw against USF. And I think it's really only a matter of time in terms of when are the boosters going to be able to pass the hat around enough to cut that check, because I think everybody's kind of looking at this being a job that is coming open in the near future.
If this were 2 or 3, 4 years ago, I would be very much buying into Gino's open date termination possibility. Things have changed largely because of the portal, and early firings are no longer in vogue because everybody's afraid you're going to lose your roster immediately. Everybody evacuates. So the better chance of keeping your players for the next coach is to fire later. Doesn't mean you don't start looking behind the scenes, but I think that might be one thing that comes into play here. And yes, quite clearly, we got to see him play this game, right? Florida and LSU has been a wild series. Crazy things have happened. It would not shock me completely if Florida regroups and goes into Tiger Stadium and wins. It would surprise me, but it wouldn't shock me. So, going to let that cake bake a little bit, but in the interest of stoking the speculation, which is what we do, that's the kind of job that if it comes open will attract some of the greatest coaches in the game and the hottest names. I'm looking at it and saying within the SEC, the obvious people who would be interested are Lane Kiffin and Eli Drinkwitz. Kiffin has done very well at Ole Miss. I don't think, if Scott Strickland's making the hire, I don't think he wants to hire Lane Kiffin, but we don't know how much he's going to have control over that if there is a hire to make. Drinkwitz has done really well at Missouri, but probably feels like there's a ceiling there that certainly could be exceeded at Florida. If you go outside the league, some people think they would take a home run shot at James Franklin, who's had a long and very successful tenure at Penn State, but hasn't gotten over that hump. And if that's still the case, maybe you kick the tires there. Jed Fish is a Florida alum. You'll hear his name come up. And then there's guys like Alex Golish, who is 2-0 at South Florida. And we'll talk about their game with Miami a little later on. So, guys, if you're in that chair and you do decide that Billy Napier is not the guy, where do you think Florida goes?
You know, Pat, I like the Drinkwitz idea. And I think Kiffin is intriguing. I think you still have to take a little bit of a leap of faith with him, though he's been very honest about sort of the personal transformation journey that he's been on. I think, as ridiculous as it might sound, I think you have to call Nick Saban and make him tell you, I'm absolutely not interested in coming back to coaching. Would he do it? I don't think so in a million years. I think you have to make the call. I think you have to make a call to Dan Lanning and have him tell you no.
Yeah.
But how many times, Oregon's always going to be fourth on that list in the Big Ten behind Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. And there's always that travel. And does he want to come back to the Southeastern Conference? I'll tell you a couple names that are really intriguing to me. In conference, Clark Lee at Vandy. I think that guy has some real gravitas to him. What he's done at Vandy is nothing short of miraculous. I think he comes in with instant credibility. And if you want to go out of conference, again, I don't know if he's a perfect fit, but you got a guy named Pat Fitzgerald just sitting there waiting. And that could possibly work. So those are the names that if I were Strickland, I'd certainly have on my list somewhere.
You know, this whole discussion has made me think of a photo I saw a couple weeks ago when, Urban Meyer's sitting there in the background. So now I'm just thinking about Urban Meyer, interim Florida head coach for the second half of the season, which I'm sure we can all get behind and enjoy and soak up Urban going from the TV booth to the sidelines again there in Gainesville. But, Pat, you mentioned Jed Fish. I think that's probably the name we're going to get hit over the head with, quite a bit. Oh, he's an alum. He was Howie Roseman's, roommate. He worked for Spurrier. He's got all the connections. I think a lot of it's going to come down to, can he get Washington kind of over that 7-5, 8-4 type of hump to really get in some interest in terms of the fan base and get some interest in terms of the boosters for a return to Gainesville. I'd also mention John Summerall. I think he's going to be the hot candidate in terms of who is that group of 5 head coach that is ready to make the leap. I think there are going to be some concerns around Florida. Do we go back to somebody in that same, not only in that same state in Louisiana, but do we go, having a guy that doesn't have experience, but he's an SEC alum. He knows the league well. I think he's been connected to certainly the Auburn job, the Kentucky job, if that were to come open. This is a much better job. And I think he would be, certainly interested in terms of, hey, that is a potential job where I can maximize things. I can win a lot. It is much more of a turnkey operation in terms of all the off-field personnel that have already been installed there. You mentioned Eli Drinkowitz. I throw in Todd Monken there, the Ravens offensive coordinator, was up at Georgia. He's a guy that's getting some looks, for NFL head coaching jobs. But, if he wants to come back to college, he was a former college head coach. I think he's a hot name. And I'd throw out Tyson Helton, too. He's done a terrific job at Western Kentucky. Has that type of offense that I think, it's one thing to win at Florida, but it's such a unique fan base in terms of what they want on the field. They don't just want to win. They want you to blow out opponents. And I think with the offense that Tyson Helton has, if he can get back into the mix, maybe win Conference USA down the stretch, I think that could be another name that if they miss out on a couple of those early targets and they get a lot of no's early in the process, maybe that's a guy that they end up turning to.
There you go.
Interesting. It would be as big a jump to go from
candidates for them.
What's that, Gene?
There's 55 candidates for Strickland now. We just helped them out.
We're the search firm, and we didn't narrow it down very much. Sorry. No,
as long as we get the finders,
like Billy Napier going from WKU to Florida is like going Louisiana Lafayette to Florida. So I don't know whether they want to do that again. Just for stirring the pot purposes, you guys threw out Nick Saban and Urban Meyer. So let's just start there and see how that reaction goes. All right, there's another candidate out there, another job, I should say, where things are going very poorly early, and everybody wants to fire the coach 2 games in. That's Virginia Tech and Brent Pry. He's in his 4th season. I was kind of surprised he got a 4th season. I believe he was 5 games under 500, his first 3 at a place that's got a pretty good tradition. Does he go? And if he does, who do you guys like next? Brian, you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, he's 16-23 going into his 4th season right now. And, I think it's a manageable buyout by all reasonable standards at about like $6 million.
$6 million, I think.
So, look, this Old Dominion game is definitely, I think, one of those, I think I mentioned it a couple episodes ago in terms of, hey, circle this date, if he ends up getting blown out by Vandy, which he did, if he ends up not, coming up short against South Carolina in a standalone game on Labor Day weekend. This is this is a dicey one, I think for Brent Pry. And look, we saw a couple of weeks ago, the AD Whit Babcock there made a presentation to the board there talking about athletics plays. We're falling behind. We are at risk of getting left behind if there's some sort of split or some sort of issues. We've already seen unequal revenue sharing implemented in the ACC, which is tied to TV ratings. So there's a real risk, I think, for the Hokies there to fall behind. So I think that puts even more pressure, not only Brent Pry to get this thing turned around, but really for a home run hire. And I think that's going to be unique in this case for Virginia Tech. There's going to be a lot of internal pressure to say, we've got to do something here. And to me, Brent Pry was a questionable choice, I think, initially. All right, you understand, all right, guy who maybe has some ties to the area, defensive guy, hard nosed, like you think that could work, but this is a difficult job. I think that the Beamer era certainly overshadows everybody that's going to come after this. But ask Justin Fuente. I mean, this can be a very difficult job, even though you have that possibility of winning. And so I think it's going to be fascinating to see what they end up doing here, whether the timing makes sense to make a midseason firing. But I think it's going to attract some very interesting candidates. I throw out Ryan Silverfield there at Memphis as a potential option. You got Matt Entz if he keeps winning there at Fresno State, another former coach that kind of has that hard lunch pail type of mentality. And I'd also throw out Jimbo Fisher as a potential option there for the Hokies. That he's a TV analyst now. He's getting his lay of the land in terms of running around the ACC there. That could be an interesting, big, splashy hire that Virginia Tech might want to make in this case, not only just to get back on the national radar, but to do something well. Because I think that the problem with Brent Pry's team, you can't say, all right, he's great at special teams. This is a really good defensive team. Oh, they're great on offense. Like we haven't seen really one even phase of the game really stick out for Virginia Tech. And that's probably the problem and why he's on the hot seat right now.
Well, he did punt on 4th and inches in this past game, which didn't endear him to anybody.
Not exactly Beamer ball.
If you look at that schedule, I think it's going to be really difficult to squeeze 5 or 6 wins out of this year for them. I've said it before. I'll keep on saying it till maybe somebody listens, some athletic director listens. Jeff Monken. There is not a coach that has squeezed more out of his teams over his 12 years than Monken has at Army. Go back and look at the before and after Monken. I mean, he won 12 games last year. His teams play tough. They play hard. They play disciplined. They have an identity. He's capable of adapting his offenses to the talent that he's had. He hasn't had a lot of offensive talent, and yet they're still able to churn out these winning seasons. He's a guy that I think would really fit there. I think it's time for him to rotate out of Army. He's done his duty for West Point. And I think a program like Virginia Tech, he's not flashy, he's not super sexy as Jimbo Fisher as far as a splash hire would be, but he's a guy that knows how to build a winning program. That's the guy I would go after.
I love Jeff Monken. I was up there for several days last year, and just the whole vibe there. That is a hard-ass dude, all right? And his teams play that way.
Yep.
And you wonder if some of these places need to counter program in terms of how they run things. He wouldn't necessarily just run a, triple option offense in which you run the ball 99% of the time. He could diversify from that, but you would get the mentality that went with it. So that will be an interesting one if you're Virginia Tech, because you are right on that fault line of like, can we possibly get back to being relevant and as good as we were? And the fans want it and remember it, but it's not that easy. And especially with the uneven revenue distribution, I think teams are scrambling that aren't Clemson and Florida State to say, how are we going to make enough money to make this work to compete with them? So that would be one of those hires that I think would fall into a really fascinating category. So we've thrown out 3 former national championship coaches for jobs. We got Saban, we got Urban, we got Jimbo. Why not swing big? That's what we're looking at here. But speaking of Nick Saban, I wanted to veer over to what he said on the Pat McAfee show Friday, I believe it was, in which he basically said the Big Ten has a money advantage over the SEC because of old-time generational wealth. Said kids grew up wanting to go to LSU, Alabama, Georgia. You got the money now. They don't mind going to Ohio State. They don't mind going to other places. So that geographic advantage that the Southeastern Conference had may be changing a little bit now with the different culture, with NIL and money involved in decision-making. That's created a little bit of an edge for the Big Ten. I thought it was an interesting point from Coach Saban, as he often tends to make. I agree with part of what he's saying. I disagree with part of it. This, to me, is one of these things we hear from coaches, even former coaches, who react to any perceived disadvantage of, oh my God, the sky is falling and, this is a disaster. And we're now, because there are more billionaires who went to Big Ten schools, the SEC can't compete. I think that is an exaggeration of the situation. But the reality is there are more alums and probably more wealthy alums from the Big Ten. They have bigger schools. Most of them have higher academic rankings than the SEC. Does that translate necessarily to more money from your donors? Maybe, but if all it mattered was rich guys who went to your school, Stanford, Northwestern, and Duke would be a lot better at football than they are. So there's more to it than that. And the other part of the equation, this is not the first time that players from the South have started going to the Big Ten. You can look at Urban Meyer, recruited the hell out of the South when he was at Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh had some notable successes. Those playoff teams, 21, 22, 23, had several guys, impact players from Florida and Georgia. And I do think young kids want to go away from home more often. Gene, I'm curious, you teach at Tennessee. Where are your students from? What geographic areas are they coming from that you teach?
They're coming from all over. I mean, a little more than 30% of the students at Tennessee are from out of state. They're turning away out of state students these days. And if I asked them in my class, raise your hand, are you from out of state? I had one class last fall where 2/3 of them were from out of state. My niece is from Connecticut. She's a freshman here. I mean, I think the South schools are seeing an influx of kids from the Northeast and Midwest. But to your point, yes, the alumni bases at Big Ten schools are massive. The enrollments at some of those schools, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, are massive. So of course they have the possibility of attracting more donor money. But I'm not ready to set up a GoFundMe page for the SEC just yet. Go on to any of these campuses here in the Southeastern Conference. The facilities are remarkable. All the things that they have available to their players are remarkable. So, yes, if you look at the numbers, just in conventional revenue, the Big Ten brought in more money last year. It distributed more money to its members than the SEC did. So, yes, it might mean more to SEC, but the Big Ten is distributing more money to its teams. I think Saban brings up an interesting point, but until I see real data supporting it, I'm not sure I totally buy it. And finally, the Big Ten has been recruiting the South for years. I went to high school in Fort Lauderdale. Michigan was recruiting South Florida for decades.
Yeah.
And the SEC has been recruiting New Jersey, Ohio, cherry picking in certain states for decades also. So I'm not sure I totally buy the argument.
Well, and I think a lot of it comes down to opportunities. Kids are seeing that they can have a chance to play at a lot of these Big Ten schools. They can play on national TV like they would in the SEC, and instead of sitting on the bench, but behind maybe a first-round draft pick, they can go up to some of those Big Ten schools and actually get on the field. And I think that's the other thing that has happened in this one-time transfer portal era, also with NIL. You guys are seeking out opportunities, and that to me
money.
Is yes, and money, but and that also speaks to I think the thing that Saban is really getting at is the fact that the Big Ten has started to get his house in order. I think for a long time, there was definitely some reluctance on a lot of these Big Ten fan bases, a lot of these Big Ten schools themselves in terms of the athletic departments, in terms of, all right, how do we compete, mano a mano against some of these SEC programs in terms of some of the offers that we are handing out to these kids, and I think they've come around. It was a little bit of a slow start for them up there in Big Ten country in terms of, all right, here's $5 million to come play for us over 3 years. Now I think there's much more of an emphasis on like, all right, well, this is the game now, and we're finally getting everybody to come around to the table, and I think it's going to help and really probably exacerbate things, in the revenue share era, where you can have, there's a lot of car dealerships across the Midwest that you can create NIL opportunities to kind of go above the cap and make some of those issues that where those head-to-head battles against the SEC don't mean as much to a lot of these kids. And so I think it's probably going to be more of a trend, but it's nothing that the SEC can't combat with what they have going on as well on their own campuses.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is it's not like the SEC is just going to roll over and say, "Oh, you got us." So I don't anticipate this being the turning of the tide forever in favor of the Big Ten. It's not. Hey, you got Larry Ellison, the Oracle founder, who now I guess is the richest man in the world, and his fourth, fifth, or sixth wife wanted them to have Bryce Underwood and help make that happen. Congratulations. But that doesn't mean that other places aren't going to be able to find enough money to get players as that evolves. Illinois just had a booster that a donor gave $100 million. That's a nice thing to have. There's not that many $100 million boosters out there. So for Illinois to have one, good for the Illini. But I don't think the economics of the sport are changing to the point where the Big Ten is now going to rule in perpetuity. But speaking of Big Ten, speaking of economics, speaking of whether the playing field is level or not, some interesting comments from Ohio State President Ted Carter yesterday, I believe it was, talking about the possibility, at least opening the door for uneven revenue distribution within the conference based on TV ratings. And we know who that would benefit.
Who?
Yeah. Not Purdue, not Maryland, not Minnesota. Ohio State, which just drew $16.6 million for its, or 16.6 million viewers, for its opener against Texas. And so Carter kind of hemmed and hawed around this thing, but then he got down to the point of, saying so that's what happens when you put the Ohio State brand out there in terms of viewership, and asked whether that should translate into something different in terms of revenue share. So it doesn't matter what Ted Carter thinks. I think that's going to be a conversation that will be had over time. This is probably where things are evolving. We saw the ACC has now stratified its revenue by ratings, also by accomplishment, but with the Success Initiative, but by ratings as well. Most favored nation status due to TV clout also helped the demise of the Big 12 when Texas and its Tier 3 Longhorn network helped blow everything out of the water there. I don't think it's very good for stability in terms of conferences, but is it reality? Gino, where do you see this thing going?
Interesting. Carter just happened to have those TV ratings right next to him, had that information with him. It's not up to Ted Carter. Of course, he's brought it up. You don't accidentally start discussing this with USA Today by accident. He wants it out there. He's floating it. I'm sure he has support for it. I'm sure Michigan would support something like this. Penn State would support it. So it's not a surprise. I think that's where we're headed. We're going to see something, what happens if Bama wakes up one day and decides it wants more of the pie because of its ratings? Georgia does the same thing. It's the way it's going to go, unfortunately, but I don't see any way around it. I think that's where we're headed. I think Carter's just saying the silent part out loud, and that will be the reality of the situation soon enough.
This is the freight train barreling down the tracks towards college athletics. Like, this is the discussion that is going to, I think, dominate us as we get closer to the 2030s when a lot of those TV contracts come up. And, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how does this get across the finish line, in terms of the commissioners massaging a lot of these conversations. I mean, like, I do feel like Jim Phillips got a couple of extra gray hairs there trying to deal with this in the ACC. This is going to be coming to Tony Petitti. This is going to be coming to Greg Sankey in terms of, all right, we know this is probably going to happen. I mean, everybody talks about a super league in college sports eventually happening. No, the change that is coming is the unequal revenue sharing. That is what is ultimately going to lead to kind of the super league light, if you will. Yes, Vanderbilt, Rutgers, you're still going to remain in the league, but in terms of what you're actually getting out the door, what that check is getting cut is definitely going to be different. And I think this is a conversation that it almost feels fait accompli in terms of it's going to happen based on a lot of the conversations that I have. It's just which schools are going to be prepared for this, in terms of the lower end, those lower resource schools, the schools you don't think have that, success on the field historically. How are they going to deal with this before it happens? How are you planning financially, down the road to where, Ohio State gets double what a Maryland or a Rutgers is going to end up getting from the conference office? I think that is going to be an interesting thing for a lot of athletic directors to kind of wrap their heads around, and a lot of, school presidents, school boards, in terms of, all right, maybe we are getting less from the conference. That means we got to step up our own investment in the program if we're going to remain relevant, not only in this discussion to get those big checks, but also remain relevant inside our own conference. We got to make sure that we have a stay. And so I think it's going to be the thing that is, now that we're past House, now that we're kind of going into this new era in college athletics, this is going to be one of those conversations that's going to dominate a lot of those chats off to the side amongst college presidents, amongst ADs, and even amongst coaches in terms of what they're getting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of inflection point here is if ratings become currency, then a lot of the long-standing equality in conferences suddenly starts to fracture. And if you are Purdue and Indiana and Illinois and so on and so forth, you've enjoyed the benefits of membership in a prestigious conference for a long time without perhaps contributing a lot to the bottom line. But you've been part of that conference forever. And is that suddenly in some way either disposable or fungible? Can your part of the pie be taken away while you still maintain membership? In the SEC, if you're the Mississippi schools, if you're Vandy, if you're South Carolina, if you're Missouri, people all of a sudden start looking and saying, well, what exactly are you bringing to the table? And if it's not as much, according to Nielsen, we're taking more away from you. I don't think it's healthy for college sports, but we've been on an unhealthy path for a long time with that.
I'm with you on that, Pat. It isn't healthy just to judge it by TV ratings. I mean, the strength of a conference is all the members of your conference, and that helped your conference stay vital and relevant and gave those lower programs at least a chance. Now, if you start taking away some of that money from them, you're not increasing their chances of success. You're hurting their chances of success. And I think in a way you're hurting your own conference, because now it really becomes super top heavy, and those middle to lower programs are never going to have a chance.
Yeah. Well, the issue here is also that, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Alabamas of the world, they also have the example that they can say, hey, do you want to be Oregon State? Do you want to be Washington State? If you don't go along with this, that's what can end up happening. And so I think that threat is also out there looming in terms of, hey, this is kind of the stick a little bit that those big time brand names are going to use to kind of get this over the line. They do have some leverage here in terms of what they can do in leaving some of these schools behind. And I think that's going to be an interesting conversation that is going to be had on a lot of campuses.
They do have leverage in it, but the unfortunate thing to me is that leverage is constantly being used or threatened to be used in college sports these days. That's what it's all about, is just trying to constantly increase your advantage, as opposed to just having a level playing field and saying, let's see who's best. And it's already the teams that are the best. That's the thing. It's like, and now Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State need more advantage? Okay, fine. That'll work out well for everyone. All right, so we've been fairly thoughtful up to this point, which is unfortunate. I think it's time to change tenor. It's time to do some ranting. Kent, let's play the BK Memorial rant.
I'm going in. Is that clear? If you guys want to go half speed, let me know now. You're wasting my time. Get your asses going.
All right, let's get our asses going. Thank you, BK, for that, Brian Kelly. I'm going to start off our rants, and this is a basketball rant. This is a college sports show. It's mostly football, but there will be times we talk some basketball, and this is one of them. It's not a pleasant topic. The NCAA on Wednesday permanently banned 3 men's college basketball players, 2 from Fresno State, 1 from San Jose State, for gambling on their own performances, on their own games. occasionally manipulating their performances to underperform in order to win bets. This is not the end of it. There is more coming, probably very soon. We're taping this Thursday morning, FYI. This has been going on. Look, I have been covering this story in one form or fashion for 18 months, and we have been building to this point where we're starting to see NCAA bans. We are going to have federal indictments. This is serious stuff that has been happening, and it's mind-boggling how easy this is. It's dumb, it's reckless, it's career-ending, but this is how easy it is, guys. Here's what happened. Primarily, Michael Robinson from Fresno State. January 7th, 2025, they are playing Colorado State in Fort Collins. Colorado State is good. Fresno is bad. Fresno's 4-11 going into this game. There's a personal prop bet on him, on his lines, his stat lines, what he can do in this game.
Yeah.
He bets the under. He plays a season-low 21 minutes. He took 4 shots. He had 0 assists. He had 2 rebounds. It was a no-show performance and a blowout loss in the middle of a dismal season. Nobody much noticed or cared. That's how easy this is to have happen. But the saving grace, if you want to call it that, is that the gambling monitoring services all of a sudden said, why are people betting on Michael Robinson's personal stat line? And dug in and found unusual wagering on a guy who averages 10 points a game for a bad team. But with the pervasiveness of gambling, the chances of finding a player on a bad team in a lower wattage conference to say, you know what? I'll take a dive. It can happen. And it is happening. And people in college sports, I think, have kind of whistled past the graveyard on this. But look out. There's more coming.
Pat, why don't they just get rid of the personal prop bets?
Charlie Baker's been trying to make that happen from the NCAA. He has been pushing for that. Some gambling services have gone along with it, some less responsive because they want people to bet on them. That's the bottom line. Is there money involved? Yes. Would this impact us making money? They seem to think so. I think the NCAA is going to continue to push for that and continue to have stories like this to help make it happen.
Well, and even in the NFL, they're pushing for this as well. You know, I think they see the downsides of sports gambling, and especially on the props. So, the NCAA has gathered a little bit more in terms of the momentum behind this than I think they had probably even just 12 months ago.
Who else got a rant for me?
Go ahead, Brian.
I am ranting against the all the furor over the AP Top 25 this week. Like week 3, and we're already debating Florida State or Florida and USF and where they fall on one person's ballot. And I'm just enough. Like, the AP poll does not matter in the grand scheme of things. It is a nice historical reference, but we do not need to be up in arms over number one person's ballot, much less a couple of people's ballots. I mean, this is like off-season fodder for people. Like, I hate why do we have these polls and all this stuff? Like, can we move past this? Like, this is a topic of conversation that we can devote a lot more interest in terms of the offseason or the preseason polls or whatever. Let's throw that out. Let's ignore it. It's fine. For those that are voting, though, you should definitely be taking these jobs seriously if you're going to end up doing it. Mistakes happen, but I think we can overlook everything going on because my timeline, I think, especially earlier in the week, I mean, how many times do you see something about USF, where they were in the polls, the issues with Florida like this? We could be devoting a lot more attention to a lot of other topics in college football nowadays than who had who in some week 3 poll.
Amen to that. I have to say that I one of the things I don't like I'm happy the AP publicizes everybody's ballots, right? And that does open you up to scrutiny, and that's part of the deal if you want a ballot. And sometimes people screw up, but we've turned this into like this gang up scenario of like, I don't like your vote. That's terrible. Let's all go get that person because you didn't vote the way I think you should vote. And it's ridiculous. And okay, yes, there was one person who apparently really screwed up on voting with Florida this last week, and she took a beating for it, and she didn't have a very good explanation for it. That's why there's like 63 voters, man. It doesn't matter. It all gets outweighed. One bad ballot does not matter. So this schoolyard bullying of anybody whose ballot we don't like is not my cup of tea. All right, I've ranted on your rant. Go ahead, Gino.
Well, I'm in big trouble because I was going to rant about the one voter.
Oh,
so I'm pretty much doomed here. But, look, it's been a minute, but I used to vote in the AP.
Yeah.
And it was a different era, and the AP vote could influence who won a national championship. It could influence where a team played in a bowl. It had real meaning. The AP poll doesn't have real meaning anymore, at least compared to back in the day. But if you're going to vote, at least pay attention. All right? There are 62 voters. You're right. 1 out of 62 is at the end of the world after week 2? Of course not. Did this poor voter take much more heat than she deserved? Absolutely. But if you move Florida from 16th to 14th after they lose to USF and don't rank USF in your top 25, you're going to catch some heat, and deservedly so. So at least pay attention. At least put the effort into it. Yes, it's not that huge of a deal. But if you don't want to put the effort into it, let's get somebody else in there that will at least pay attention. That's all I'm saying. No, does she need to be crucified? Of course not. But at least make the effort. Okay?
It was a bad ballot. It was a very bad ballot. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. It was a horrific ballot.
Yeah. Fortunately, again, there are so many voters that, especially in week 3, didn't really make that much of an impact. All right. Winners and steak dinners, our pick'em contest. I know we are making people just tons of money based on our brilliant picks.
Some of us
actually.
Oh, yeah, Brian is. Sorry.
Yeah. But if you are gambling out there on games, which is your constitutional right, depending on which state you live in, go ahead, but do not use our picks as basis for making wagers. That would be incredibly foolish. So far, our standings, Brian is 7-4. He went 4-1 last week. Hit that really well. Gene is 6-5, and I can't remember what my results are at this point. So moving on from where I rank and what my picks are, we're going to talk about the games. This is a really good week of games. It is a sneaky good week. It's a deep week, and we're going to get a deep cut from each of you in a few minutes. But we're going to pick 4 games here first. Really great SEC game in your backyard, Gene. Georgia giving 3.5 at Tennessee. I think it's one of the best places in the country to go watch a game. And if we had more time on this particular episode, I would have had us rank our best places to watch a game. Tennessee is right up there near the top for me. But so this should be an awesome atmosphere. The Volunteer Navy's going to be out. The checkerboard end zones will look lovely. But who's going to win the game and who's going to cover the spread? Gene.
I think Georgia's going to win the game. I think Tennessee's going to cover the spread. Tennessee is without its 2 starting cornerbacks. Georgia's won 8 in a row against Tennessee, hasn't lost in Knoxville since 2015. I would have loved to have gotten this number when it was 7 earlier in the week. Unfortunately, I can only get the 3.5, but I think that's going to be enough.
Yeah, the hook is a little bit difficult for me with Georgia, but go ahead and give me the points there with the Bulldogs. And look, you mentioned that the 2 corners being out for Tennessee, but they're also a little bit light on both lines in terms of some of the injuries. We'll see. The injury report was a little bit questionable for some guys. Some guys were probable. Even though you might end up playing, you're not going to be 100%. And look, I'm very curious to see what Gunnar Stockton does in this game. Like, this is the microscope is going to be on him. He's got a better wide receiving core. He's got some offensive linemen that are coming back. Like, this is going to be a very interesting game. Prime time, under the lights. That is a hostile crowd, as you guys both know. I'm going to be very interested to see how Gunnar Stockton plays. But I think overall state of the program, how these 2 teams kind of come into this matchup, I am going to lean with Georgia in this one.
Yeah, point of order, I think it's 3:30 kickoff there, so it's not prime time. But nevertheless, the place will be completely rocking and berserk. And I'm taking Tennessee. I think Tennessee can win outright. I know they have the cornerback injuries. I'm not sure Gunnar Stockton's capable of fully exploiting that. I've been super impressed with Joey Aguilar so far. I think Tennessee's defense is good as well. I fully anticipate Tennessee finally breaking that streak against the Dogs and getting a victory here at home. So I'm taking them not just to cover, but to win outright. All right, game I'm going to attend. Texas A&M at Notre Dame. Aggies getting 6.5. It's the annual Marcus Freeman backs against the wall in September game. His pattern has been to lose a game early. There's certainly no shame in losing in Florida to a good Miami team, but it puts Notre Dame in a tough spot because the rest of the schedule, depending on how things work out, isn't necessarily something that's going to just be percolating with quality wins if you can keep winning through there. So, maybe the USC game turns into something big. There are a couple other possible games that do, but this game against A&M, first of all, you don't want to be 0-2, but you've got to beat somebody. A&M's a ranked team. Won its opener, and they've looked pretty good. And I think Mike Elko's a really good coach and has gotten them on much more solid footing. They're a more physical team than they were under Jimbo Fisher. It's a good matchup there, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to take Notre Dame. I think that they are a good team and a good program and a good spot, and at home, I think that they get business done and keep their playoff path on tack.
At home, coming off of a bye week, too.
Yeah.
And I don't think this time it's not going to be a cameo appearance game for Jeremiah Love this time around. And this is A&M's only road game in his first 6 games that they'll play. So Notre Dame Stadium is, you talked about Neyland Stadium rocking. That place is going to be rocking too. I think it's going to be a great atmosphere. I'm with you. I'm going to take the Irish too.
I'm going to go with the Aggies this one. I do think Notre Dame wins the game, but I think 6.5. This seems like a game that is going to be played close down to the fourth quarter. I mean, this is like a one that you kind of circle and say that game is going to go under no matter what. Just given the two defenses involved and these two head coaches that really can really scheme up things to confuse a young quarterback. And, Marcel Reed does seem like he's going to be good to go after getting injured and leaving early in that Utah State game for the Aggies. So I think they can keep it close. And I think it's going to be interesting to see with that bye week for Notre Dame. Did they discover some things with Mike Denbrock, not only just handing the ball off to Jeremiah Love a little bit more, but can they get that downfield passing game going? Because, when CJ Carr in that Miami game, when they were operating more of that 2-minute offense, when they were kind of getting into the flow of things, he impressed me with what he was able to do. He's not Riley Leonard by any stretch of the imagination in terms of the quarterback run game, but I think he's going to have a good game here in the home opener for the Irish. I think they win, but I think A&M keeps it close enough to cover that 6.5.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame felt like CJ Carr played very well, actually, for his first game and first real experience. But one of the things they probably wish he would have done was hand the ball more to Jeremiah Love on reads, zone read, where, the quarterback can pull it or you can hand it. You can tag to a run pass option. I think they're going to say force the issue a little bit. Jeremiah Love needs to have the ball more than, I think it was 12 times that he did in that game. So I would look for number 4 to have the ball a lot on Saturday night. All right, South Florida, number 18, playing at Miami. Unbelievable start to the season for the Bulls. You play Boise State, Florida in the Swamp, Miami and South Florida. Wow, and you're 2-0. Double wow there. I talked to Alex Golish Wednesday night. We'll have a story Thursday, SI.com. Delightful guy, really fun conversation, interesting. He is so in the belly of the beast right now. You're 2-0 and you're trying to get ready for Miami, and he's trying to handle all the hoopla and attention that's coming with it. But gave me some really thoughtful insight into what it's been like building that program, and how he's just kind of seen these incremental points in the spring and in the summer where all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're getting it. And it's got to be so exciting for a coach, You've been grinding through 2 7-6 seasons, and now all of a sudden you feel like you're poised for a breakthrough. But no easy assignment here. Brian, 17.5 is the number that the Bulls are getting. Which side of that are you on?
I'm going with Miami in this one. I think that the physicality of Mario Cristobal's team is going to pay off in a game like this. But shout out to USF. I mean, like the momentum behind that program, not just on the field, but having a new AD/CEO now that they just hired in Rob Higgins. I think that's a good hire for the school. The on-campus stadium is going up, and look, USF with that win in Gainesville, first program in that state to win on the other home fields of the other 6 FBS programs. So USF, a lot of momentum, but I think just the issue is, you get up those highs for 2 weeks. What happens when you get punched back in the face down there in Miami? I think the Hurricanes, because of those wins, they are going to have this game circled. They're going to be prepared for this. I think they had the warm up last week with Bethune-Cookman. It's a big number, but I think it's one that Miami ultimately will end up covering late.
This feels like a Nick Saban rat poison game where everybody is patting USF on the back and I'm yelling at a poor AP voter for not ranking them and, all of this. And USF deserves all the attention that it's gotten. It deserves all the stories. It deserves the ranking. It's done everything it can possibly do. And even though it's 17.5, I'm going to take Miami also and lay the 17.5 because I think nobody's talking about Miami going into this game. We're all talking about USF. I think Miami's just kind of laying there in the weeds, waiting and wants to teach a little lesson. So I think USF is going to get Miami's best.
And shout out to this being on the CW too.
Yeah, their biggest game ever. You all
make a long history
point
of covering college football.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You guys make valid points, but let me tell you, you don't get to be 4-7 in this contest by going with the conventional wisdom. Oh no, I'm taking South Florida and the points. I like that little hook there at 17.5. Block Ruben Bain. That would be my first piece of advice for USF because that dude has wrecked a couple games already at defensive tackle for the Hurricanes. But I like what USF is made of. If they're not flat from the emotion of winning in the swamp, I think they're going to come in and at least be competitive. Byron Brown has been really good. They have not committed a turnover yet this year. If you keep that streak continuing, if you have a clean turnover slate through 3 games, you're going to be in this game. You may lose by 14, but you're not going to lose by 17.5. So, all right, last game we're going to pick before we get to a couple of other points here. Vanderbilt getting 5.5 at South Carolina. Not a game I expected us to be talking about before the season, but here we are. Commodores, I am intrigued by them. I am entertained by them. They absolutely destroyed Virginia Tech on the road in the second half last week. They've got some moxie to them. Do they have enough moxie to cover 5.5? I'm going to say they can win outright. I'm a believer right now in what Vandy's doing. Give me Diego Pavia and send me into battle. Bring it. And South Carolina, look, they're good. They showed me a little bit more against Virginia Tech than I expected in the opener. But I'm rolling with the Doors here. Not just to win, or not just to cover, but to win. What do you guys think?
I think Vandy's a tough out, especially with Pavia. That seems like a lot of points to give him. I raved about Clark Lee and possibly being the next Florida coach along with 400 other people. But I think Lee's the real deal. I think he'll have that team ready. I'll take Vandy and I'll take those points.
I'll go with the Doors as well. I think the physical nature of that team, they're going to remain in a lot of these battles against kind of like-minded SEC programs. And I still don't get a good sense in terms of where South Carolina is. Yes, I think there's been progress with Lenore Sellers, and he's a guy that you just want to watch every time he takes a snap with what he can do with the ball in his hands. But overall, as a team, especially defensively, trying to stop a guy like Diego Pavia, I'm just not sure in terms of that they have this for 4 quarters. Vandy, they're going to fight to the end. So even if it's coming through the back door, I think they can cover that 5.5.
Good Lord, we have sunk Vanderbilt. I can't believe we're all picking Vanderbilt on the road in a game.
Yeah.
That's where we are. Sorry. Condolences to the 11 Doors fans out there, but we're on your bandwagon. Okay, we will have a lock of the week, but first, this is, again, as I said, a deep week. There's a lot of interesting games that aren't necessarily marquee games. They're not super flashy, but there's a lot of fun ones out there. It's going to be a fun day to sit all day in front of your TV and watch. Give me a deep cut from a deep week, each of you. Gino, go ahead.
Clemson at Georgia Tech for me, especially now that I know Haynes King sounds as if he's going to play against Clemson. That's huge for me. And even if he didn't play, I'd still be intrigued by this game. I'm also intrigued, can Clemson reassert itself? I think we find out really if Clemson is going to be a national player off of this game. And before the season started, we picked our surprise teams. And in the ACC, I think I took Georgia Tech as a team that could be that team that kind of comes out of semi-nowhere, not nowhere. They've asserted themselves in the past. But at Bobby Dodd, I think that's going to be a cool atmosphere. That game really intrigues me.
I'm gonna go with the Darian Mensah Bowl. Duke at Tulane, and look, I think there's going to be a lot of people playing up the fact that look, the former quarterback is just coming back into town, playing his old team. I still get the sense everybody around the Green Wave was actually happy for Darian to go get that bag from the Blue Devils to go and really change the fortunes of his family. Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports had a good story on the Mensah family and what they've been able to do with a lot of those NIL funds. And look, John Summerall in this game, I think it's fascinating because you talk about adding 2 potential Power 4 victories on the resume, not only comparing that to USF and the American, but this could be a big game in terms of playoff implications as well if Tulane can get over. He's 27-0 in his career when his team outrushes the opponent. Duke only had 82 yards on the ground against Illinois, turned the ball over a lot. I do think Duke ends up winning this one, but it's probably going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a very interesting game and one that I think we're going to look back on at the end of the season and say, hey, that actually had an impact not only in the college football playoff race, but potentially for John Summerall getting on even more radars for athletic directors to get hired elsewhere.
All right, I'm going to shout out USC at Purdue, which was another game nobody really cared about, but now I think is a little more interesting. First of all, I want to see USC, when they've traveled to the Midwest last year in their first year in the Big Ten, they found ways to lose. They lost every game, all of their long travel games. This year, Lincoln Riley says we've learned some things, we've changed some things, but Purdue's changed some things. They changed head coach. Barry Odom is there. They look a lot better than they were last year when they were kind of hopeless. So I want to see, this is a yardstick for me to measure whether USC is legitimate. They're going to have a much harder game still to come. But can you go? Can you leave? Can you go to the Midwest and take care of business in a way that suggests USC is an improved product over the last couple of seasons when they've been a crashing disappointment? And Lincoln Riley has tended to, I think his teams are front runners. When they're playing well against a bad team, they go and they score 70 and they look brilliant. Things get a little muddy. How do they react? So that's what I want to see in that game. And I'm curious just to see, does Ross 8 have a little bit of juice? At times, that's been a tough place to play during the Jeff Brom era, but that was a while ago. Can Barry Odom bring that back? So a lot of games to watch. You guys enjoy the whole Saturday, but let's get back here and give me your lock of the week. Brian, who do you have?
Georgia Southern, 3.5 points, favored over Jacksonville State. The Eagles spent all of last week in California. They played USC and Fresno State back-to-back, trained in Oxnard with the Cowboys facilities. Coming back home, I think there's a lot of momentum behind Jacksonville State after that upset against Liberty, but give me Clay Helton and the Eagles covering that 3.5.
That is a deep cut.
Wow. Brian hasn't lost a lot of a week, so I really should order what he's having.
Yeah.
But I guess that's probably not fair. Ohio coming off that huge win against West Virginia. A lot of momentum for Ohio. They're playing Ohio State. And yet I'm going to take Ohio State and lay the, 13 30.5 points. Yeah, 30.5 points. Congrats on the West Virginia win. And now good luck against the Buckeyes.
Yeah, that one's set up to potentially be a beat down there. I was thrilled for Ohio to get that win, to get a West Virginia to come play at your place and then to win the game. That was big, but reality arrives this week. And I think a reality arrives with the giant duck, with or without the duck. Oregon is coming in to the shores of Lake Michigan and pummeling Northwestern. I don't think the 9 o'clock kickoff is going to matter. I think Oregon is really good. I think Northwestern is really not. The number is 27.5. I see at least 28 for the spread on that, probably more like 35. I think Oregon rolls up Northwestern in Evanston. So there's your locks of the week. Come back on Monday. We'll see how bad we did on those. One last thing I want to get to here, guys. Did you hear there was a wild boar that broke into a house, blasted through a sliding glass door, 300-pound, angry, aggressive wild boar. I don't want to say where it is yet, but sheriff's deputies show up. People are taking, their cell phone video of it. Deputies get basically run out of the house. They can't handle the boar. The boar is a load. It is a handful. They eventually, I think, get the thing apprehended or at least out of the house and out of the neighborhood. But quite a scene there. Now, the boar was in Florida, of course, because stuff happens in Florida more than it happens anywhere else. So here's my question for you all. I'm taking this as an omen. Is the boar so mad at Billy Napier that he's like running rampant through Florida, like we got to get rid of Billy Napier? Or is the boar signaling that Arkansas is back and is going to upset Mississippi this week? Which side of this are you landing on, Gene Wojciechowski?
Oh, my God. We start with a duck on this podcast. We end up with a boar. For a moment, I thought you were talking about the boar, not the boar. I don't know. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But you know what? Just to humor you,
yes,
I'm going to say it's just angry at Billy Napier. Does that satisfy you at all?
That's fine. Look, it's either or. I'll tell you which is the correct answer, but that's fine.
Okay. Is there a correct answer?
Always.
Okay.
Always.
Please help me. Brian,
if we could somehow get the Ames water, if he was like somehow drinking some Ames tap water, like that would be the only way we could hit the trifecta in terms of duck, boar, Ames water, and then we know we would have the trifecta for the show. I'm definitely going with this is a bad omen for Billy Napier. As much as we want the Hogs to be back, I think the fact that this is not something you normally see even in Florida, I think I'll go with the Napier one.
No, you're wrong, both of you. It's definitely a sign that Arkansas is back, and Taylen Green's going to go crazy against Ole Miss this weekend.
Well, that is a crazy rivalry. Every time those two teams meet, something weird does seem to happen. So I get where you're coming from, Pat.
Then why didn't you pick that as your lock of the week?
I was saving that for this. You can't just be throwing stuff out. You got to have a little payload at the end here.
I understand. I'm new to this podcast thing.
Arkansas rolling. The Hog says so. The Hog is breaking into houses. Look out for the Hogs. All right, that's our show for the week. Exxon Valdez, I think, avoided the rocks for one more week. We'll see if we're back for episode 5. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. Thanks for listening.